All right, then, let's jump into one of our favorite topics on this program, taxes, or in this particular instance, the link between inequality and taxation. Extreme inequality in Kenya, East Africa's second largest economy, is undermining economic growth. It's exacerbating poverty and social unrest. Kenya has one of the fastest growing numbers of super-rich in the world. According to Oxfam data, some 8,300 people, that's about 0.1% of the population, now own more wealth than the bottom 99% of the country's population. Now, if Kenya had also increased its tax to GDP ratio by about 300 basis points or so in 2014, going up to just over 20%, the government could have had enough money to provide free, quality public health care and education to all Kenyans. Now, this is all contained in a report called Taxing for a More Equal Kenya. It comes in the wake of the Paradise Papers leak that exposed the scale of untaxed wealth that is buried in offshore locations, and there were quite a few prominent Kenyans who were mentioned in that leak. All right, then, so let's get deep into the details of this particular report. I'm now joined by one of its lead authors. Kinyori-Gugu is the Tax Justice Project Manager at Oxfam, covering the Horn, East Africa and Central Africa as well. She's live in studio with me tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rama.
This is a pretty big report, but let me start with one of the proposals you made, which I found most interesting. Tax relief for women in employment who are also engaged in providing essentially what is unrecognized, non-remunerated labor in the household. Tell us how this would work.
So we believe that some of the key things that need to happen is that the unpaid care work that's happening in Kenya and globally needs to be recognized by government and by private sector in terms of its contribution to the economy. So if we're to recognize unpaid care work, what do we need to do? First, we need to understand what kind of unpaid care work is happening out there. And secondly, we need to understand then how much does the unpaid care work contribute to the economy, and then we cost it. Once we've costed it, then we'll be able to understand what kind of model we're going to employ to be able to recognize that unpaid care work. And it's happened in different jurisdictions, Hong Kong, France, the US. And
so we're not reinventing the wheel here.
We're not really reinventing the wheel, and it can take so it doesn't necessarily have to be for employed women, it can be for unemployed women as well, because there are many stay-at-home moms who undertake this kind of work.
And the way the economy is structured, at this point anyway, you've got a big chunk of the workforce, especially in the informal sector, coming in from women too.
Exactly. And recognizing this, because they have a contribution, and moving it from a consumption kind of unit to a productive unit, then we are able to know as an economy how much then are these really people who are doing productive work are then contributing. And it can take the form of, tax reliefs, there's been tax credits, there's child and dependency allowances. So they can take many different forms. What is important is for us to understand their contribution, and as well as know what works best for the taxpayer, but also for the state as well.
Let me step back a bit and probably apply Occam's razor here. Why not just have a differential tax rate that's lower for women in general across the board?
Well, first, that would be a bit discriminatory, but what we're looking at is how does the tax system affect gender differently? How does it affect men and women differently? Who is in the formal economy? Of course, men are more in the formal economy than the informal economy. What we would be then looking at is what is your contribution? And actually, one of the key recommendations, or at least the crux of what we are saying, is that everyone should be paying a fair share of their taxes.
Yeah.
So if you earn more, you pay more. If you earn less, then you pay less. And that's the progressivity of the tax system anyway.
All right, fair enough. There's a new income tax bill which apparently no one has seen yet. I certainly haven't. The tax guys I speak to haven't seen it yet. But let's assume for argument's sake that we had input into it. What are the top 3 things that must be in there based on the work you've done in this report?
Okay, so based on the work we've done is some of the key recommendations we're making is around the Income Tax Act. And we're saying that it needs to be more progressive. So our report actually recommends that we need to then increase a band Because currently you're taxing at 30% anyone above 42,000, for instance.
Yeah.
Yet there are people who could be earning 7 million. 30% of 7 million, which is the average pay of a CEO in Kenya, and 42,000 is completely different. So we're looking at increasing, we're making recommendations to increase the tax band to perhaps 40 or 45% for those earning above a certain amount.
All right, I should also point out, just for our viewers who are not familiar with Kenya's tax system, that the last time we revised these bands before this fiscal year was 2004. The top income tax rate is about 30%.
Yes, 30%, exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. The second recommendation I think we've made, and we also submitted some recommendations to the National Treasury, is that we need to review the tax incentive framework. So we need to have a more transparent and accountable tax incentive framework, where we're ensuring we're doing an annual cost-benefit analysis to understand what the contribution of these tax incentives have to the economy, how they are being issued, to whom they're being issued, and these have to have checks and balances.
And they must have targets linked to them.
Exactly. So if you're saying that tax incentives is bringing in foreign direct investments, and the foreign direct investments are contributing to this amount of the economy, we need to monitor that. Is that happening over the 10-year period that they're being given? And are they actually contributing what they're saying they're going to contribute? So we believe that it's important for us to have a cost-benefit analysis, an annual cost-benefit analysis of these tax incentives, to ensure that the government is not losing out on any potential tax revenues.
Right. What about adjusting them for inflation? Because one of the problems that we've had with the old one was that once they were set in 2004, they really didn't move. Yeah. And there was absolutely no adjustment for inflation, which makes no sense.
Yes, yes. That's definitely one of the recommendations as well for the income tax and the pay-as-you-earn, where we are saying that we need to adjust the Income Tax Act for inflationary, for the inflation, because we realize that the poor are actually the ones who will probably pay much more if they are not adjusted on inflation, because then inflation will target them the most.
Yeah, and it actually hurts. I mean, inflation at the low end of the income chain is really hard. But let me wrap up with, I think it was probably a third or fourth chapter which focused exclusively on income tax issues on a personal level and the corporate level as well. So the two trends I'm trying to reconcile here. Total tax revenue has gone up from about $6.4 billion in 2010-2011, all the way to about $11 billion in 15-16. But the size of the formerly employed pool has really moved by about 18% in that period of time. But you flagged a massive amount of tax dodging by companies. So if on one hand, formal employment has been going really quickly, but we're still seeing this steep surge in total tax take, I mean, that would suggest that companies either are paying more tax or the collection mechanism has become more efficient.
Okay, so from our findings, we find that the collection has become more efficient, and we have to also recognize that we don't get our tax only from pay-as-you-earn and corporate tax, we also get that from value-added tax. So if we look at value-added tax and the efficiency, but particularly automation by the Revenue Authority, you'll find that there's been an increase in value-added tax. So if we're looking at issues of tax dodging or tax evasion, what the key questions is, even if there was an increase in corporate income tax, who's actually paying the corporate income tax? Is it national companies? Is it foreign companies? And even if they are paying, and even if there has been an increase, are these companies, particularly foreign companies, paying their fair share of taxes? So are they paying commensurate to the kind of the tax bill that they should actually be paying?
So the 30% top rate, essentially.
Exactly, exactly. And not just the 30% top rate, is are they paying and are they declaring their profits in Kenya, and are we able to tax them in Kenya? Yeah.
All right then. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. But this report doesn't have a lot of meat to go through. It certainly would recommend a lot of people to go out there